So I've got another little filament chat lined up here, just a super casual discussion of some filaments I've tried and just a couple things that have come up along the way that might prove interesting. So the primary thing I'm going to go over here is a comparison between a couple of Ninjatek filaments. One being SemiFlex, which I've already used before and talked about previously. It's a great filament. And then comparing that to Cheetah, which is a newer filament. So the surprising result here was they were almost identical. Literally, the only difference I've found so far is that the Cheetah is a slightly brighter white than the SemiFlex. I'll try to show you here. I'm not actually sure you'll even be able to see. But this one here is SemiFlex, this is Cheetah, and I don't think you're going to be able to tell on the camera, but this one is just a very bit of a slightly brighter white. Other than that, they seem to be exactly the same, or if anything, the Cheetah is ever so slightly softer, which is not at all what I was expecting based on the description from Ninjatek. So it's a little bit strange, kind of a disappointment. I was hoping for something different. I don't really understand the point of Cheetah. I know it's supposed to be able to be printed faster. For the particular designs I've been testing, I don't really want to print them faster. They need a little more time to cool when they're moving between little tiny parts and whatnot, so it wasn't really relevant for me. Also, I've got the Bondtech extruder on there, so there's just no issues with extruding it. So maybe Cheetah extrudes more easily if you don't have the Bondtech extruder or something equivalent. I'm not really sure. With regards to speed, I mean, I've tested these only up to about 35 millimeters per second, because after that it just starts messing up my design. Nothing to do with the filament so much as just the designs are too small and fine and going back over themselves too much, so they just kind of get too melty, even with fan. So, you know, if I have something else to test this on, a different type of design, then maybe that would be the good time to see if Cheetah really can print faster. Summing up with Cheetah versus SemiFlex, I would choose SemiFlex unless I needed that brighter white, because they seem to be the same, except the SemiFlex is just the tiniest bit firmer, which sets it apart a little more from the Ninjaflex. I mean, there's just, I wish that I had a point for Cheetah, but I just can't find one, other than that it is a tiny bit whiter. If you need the brightest white possible in a semi-flexible filament, Cheetah might work for you. It's a good filament, don't get me wrong, it's the same as SemiFlex, which is also a good filament. One good thing about both the Ninjatek SemiFlex and Cheetah is that they do adhere really well to print bite. The bad side of that is they adhere a little bit too well, so it's been really frustrating trying to pry designs like this off of the print bite, because they stick on so well and they do not self-release. The flexible filaments don't self-release from print bite. So I've kind of still been using some PETG just because I have a lot of that anyways. It's a pretty decent filament. For example, this is a design printed in PETG. The nice thing is that it does come off the bed easily once it cools. The bad thing is that it sometimes will come off when you don't want it to. So that's why I had to kick the bed temp up to 80 with the print bite. And once it's at 80°C, it seems to stay stuck fine on all my designs. But it's a little bit of a pain having to wait for the bed to heat up that much. So kind of a compromise, which is probably my favorite filament right now, that's going to be Armadillo, which they all basically look the same when I show you on camera, and they really all do look basically the same. But the difference is you don't need that bed to be so hot. It actually sticks pretty well to print bite. I just get it slightly warm, and then once it does cool, it will self-release, or it's really easy to kind of just pop up with a spatula if you don't want to wait, and I never want to wait because I'm super impatient once my print's done. Now this one here, this is a PETG, and this is Armadillo. Now the difference here, the Armadillo is ever so slightly yellower. This is a slightly brighter white on the PETG, and the print quality, like how clean it is, there's some kind of lines in the PETG. It doesn't print quite as easily, and it also does tend to clump up the nozzle a little bit. the Armadillo prints cleaner. It doesn't gum up the nozzle like the PETG does. Now, when little bits get stuck on the nozzle and it builds up and it builds up, eventually it leaves a little like burnt piece in the print, and if it ends up somewhere on the outside, then it kind of ruins the print, or you have to fill it or whatever to get rid of that kind of burnt spot. Whereas with that Armadillo, I just haven't had that problem, which is why I'm really liking it, because it does print so cleanly. Another thing that I was trying to pay attention to with Cheetah, SemiFlex, and the PETG and Armadillo filaments is just kind of how well they capture detail, which I would say that all of them perform pretty well. I was working with a 0.4 nozzle on these, printing a lot of the same design like again and again in the different filaments. The PETG one that I showed you a moment ago, I mean, this is a pretty large design, simple design, so the fact that it captured these details isn't super impressive. But when you look at something much smaller, like this design here, it's got this tiny little beak here, some different levels on everything, and this one here is Cheetah, but they all captured that pretty well, both the Cheetah, the SemiFlex, PETG. The difference here is that with the more flexible filaments, the Cheetah and the SemiFlex, post-processing is much more annoying because they don't sand very well. You can sand SemiFlex and Cheetah also, but it's not as easy. And these tiny little designs, it can be really difficult to get off all those little strings and whatnot, and also to smooth out the different gradients where I'm trying to get a smooth curve. Normally I would just take my Dremel to that, super easy with a more firm filament like a PETG. With the SemiFlex and Cheetah, it just doesn't work as well. It kind of clumps up a little bit. So you can do it, but it's more work. For example, here, this is Armadillo again, and you'll see that there's a lot of little strings here, more than when it's printed in the flexible filament. But because this is easier to sand, it will actually take me less time to clean up this than to clean up this one. Also, I'm not sure if you can see, but these are all printed at 0.2 resolution because I'm planning on post-processing them. I'm not trying to have a finished product off the printer. So there's little level changes here from the low resolution. Super easy to just take off with a Dremel on the Armadillo or the PETG. Not so easy with the flexible filament like Ninjaflex and Cheetah. Another thing to think about in relation to capturing detail is whether or not you're using fan. For all of these types of small designs, you really need fan. I have a little Zapdos here. I don't know if you'll be able to see on camera, but again, I'm going to try. This one here, it's SemiFlex, but it's kind of blobby. The beak there, it just didn't come out clear. And then if you compare it to this one, this is in Cheetah, but again, they really perform the same way. The beak here is much crisper. That's just fan versus no fan. It doesn't matter if you're doing these big flat areas, the fan isn't going to make those come out better, but if you have small details, you're definitely going to want to have the fan on there or they're just going to get kind of blobby. Another thing that I have noticed when doing these small designs, this is in relation to the slicing, not the actual design itself, is when you're setting it up, go ahead and just put one perimeter if you have thin areas such as this, where it's just kind of coming to a point. I've noticed that anytime I try to have like 2 perimeters on there for whatever reason, then there is not enough area here for the crosshatch pieces to fill in the little gaps. You end up having a little tiny hole between the 2 perimeters. And reducing that to just 1 perimeter solved the problem and doesn't affect the design in any other way. Another thing to keep in mind when you are actually designing pieces, in this case, let me bring this one out. Where did it go? Here it is. Okay, here is an excellent example of pieces that were not properly overlapped. So the way that I designed these, my design process involves creating pieces separately in 1, 2, 3 design in this case, and then moving them closer and merging them together into a single piece. This piece here, it started out as an STL that was exported from Adobe Illustrator, and so then I extruded those parts up. However, once I made some little tweaks to that, like sizing and whatnot, I didn't realize that the wing and the body no longer quite overlapped. There was a teeny tiny little gap that I didn't notice until after I printed it, and then I was just testing it as usual. I'm like, what the heck? My wings are not, look at that, it just pops right off. They're not attached to the body properly. And when I looked really closely at the first layer, I could see that the nozzle, instead of filling in all of this bottom layer as one, had done perimeters around the wing, perimeters around the body, and they had kind of touched a little bit just because they were melty enough and they were really close together. But that's the reason that they had not stayed stuck together really weak at that joint. They weren't properly overlapped in the actual design. Simple solution, moved them slightly closer together here, and then the piece that you get instead, the initial layer here, this is all one continuous line across here, as opposed to being perimeters here and perimeters here. So that solves the strength issue on those. Just something to keep in mind if you're doing any designing in that kind of process of pieces that you then put together. On this design here, get it to focus. Originally I had the wings at a slight angle so that the tips would be slightly closer to you than the part here at the body. Once I actually printed it though, I realized that the angle was so slight that you couldn't really tell. Other than that, because of the low vertical resolution, there are these little lines here in the level change. So I ended up just making these flat because there was just no point in having extra cleanup to do on something that visually made no difference once the cleanup was done. If it's just the slightest change that's gonna cause you more post-processing but not change the overall look of the piece, maybe just consider, modifying your design. There's nothing wrong with designing with print in mind. It's one thing if it looks great on your screen, but how's it going to print? Is it going to be the most simple cleanup possible to get the effect that you're going for? It's all about finding the balance between time spent on design and time spent on finishing your product. So this is what this piece looks like once it's cleaned up and painted. I used a Dremel and some sandpaper to get this perfectly clean. This one was PETG, so it sands really well. I honestly haven't bothered to finish one of the soft filament ones because it's just a pain to sand on such a small scale like this. It worked fine when I was doing the Edward Elric costume, and I needed to sand larger pieces that were kind of simpler shapes. But for these really complex shapes, the flexible filament really just isn't worth it if you're going to be finishing it, like say as jewelry like this. I have a couple other examples here of just different filaments printing the same design, just to show kind of how differently they can come out. This is a PLA carbon fiber. Let's see if I can get it to focus here. And you'll see it has this big blobby part here, which, yeah, I could sand it off, but it's kind of a pain. I mean, this is not really the application you would want to use the carbon fiber fill PLA. I was just testing it out. And then this one here, same design and Invent. Again, I haven't really been able to find a particular use for this filament. This really doesn't want to focus. I mean, it pretty much just seems just like any other like PETG product, so it's fine, but it doesn't have any special anything special about it that I found just yet. And then this is that same design. This is printed in Cheetah. This was done at 20 millimeters per second, and it came out pretty clean. I mean, the feet here always come out a little bit rough because it's just the nozzle going right here. It always just melts it out, kind of. The stuff that is left over, these little nurbles here and whatnot, I mean, if this was a firmer filament, they would be super easy to clean off because it's more flexible. I could clean this up, but it's just not really worth the effort because I don't need this piece to be flexible. So this just goes back to, hey, what are you trying to make here? What's the end game? And then choose your filament based on that. Going back to Cheetah and SemiFlex, you know, they're great filaments. You can use either one. SemiFlex is slightly cheaper. I'd be really interested to see if I were to find any real benefit from Cheetah. If you guys find anything, you know, let me know. It'd be really cool. So I think that's all I've got for tonight.